Welcome to the Elvis Presley channel. Change can be scary, but it also can be good. Elvis helped many people see this when he became the face of a new genre, rockabilly. The genre developed and helped music evolve through his influence, but the path to change isn't always easy. Why people wanted to resist Elvis Presley at first. Make sure to watch the video until the end, and if you're new here, don't forget to join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Elvis Presley channel. How Elvis made rockabilly mainstream. Elvis's success stirs controversy, especially when looking at rockabilly's rise. What is rockabilly music? Bear with us. We will get to that shortly. Let's talk about the issue of who owns it or created it first. Just keep in mind that Elvis's unique tunes were more appropriately described as rockabilly and not rock and roll, as many people thought. Well, you could argue that it was a subgenre of rock and roll, but country music singers may not smile at you when you say that, but they won't be smiling at you too when you classify it as rockabilly. Either way, you'd be the bad guy, and it can be frustrating. Anyway, let's drop the specificity aside and let's just agree that there is a rockabilly genre. So, the big question is, who should be credited for its emergence? It's a bit interwoven, and this is due to the nature of rockabilly, which is the combination of different individual sounds. This is how far we can stall. If we must determine the creator or creators, we must know what rockabilly means. Rockabilly means rock and hillbilly. The rockabilly sound is an intense rhythmic style that was prominent in the 1950s. It is a product of prominent 40s sounds like gospel, R&B, blues and country music, with its different styles like bluegrass, honky-tonk, hillbilly boogie and western swing. Gospel, blues and R&B were a thing across America, but country music was much more localized and appreciated in the South, in places like Memphis, Tennessee. These sounds, combined with the African-American music styles like pop and jazz, created a glorious sound. From this you can see that rockabilly has a large African-American influence. However, this is because the uniqueness of the sound did not allow it to find appreciation among a larger audience. They more than didn't like it, they absolutely hated it. But then came Elvis, and still they hated it at first, so Elvis didn't create the sound. However, while Elvis didn't create the sound, his adoption of it helped create an acceptance of it. However, this didn't mean he didn't face criticism. Elvis got booed off stage in the early stages, and one of the stages that come to mind is the Grand Ole Opry. However, with Elvis's pristine looks, rockabilly, which had long been a faceless sound, had a face. Elvis kept at it. He covered some already established rockabilly songs. The larger audience hadn't heard those songs before, and they went crazy for it, but not all of them. The older generation had reservations about this sound, which they felt corrupted the mind of the American youth. They didn't like it when the original artists sang the original songs, and their opinion remained the same. True, the lyrics of these songs and the moves that followed the performance of these songs were enough to make the face flush. So, conservative older people wanted nothing to do with it, catchy as it might be. The younger ones didn't mind, as the rockabilly and Elvis represented something for them, freedom. So they rebelled against the norm, and so rockabilly caught on like wildfire. It began its rise in the South, but it didn't become prominent until record bosses became daring. The South was mostly conservative, and it showed in their music style. They loved their music unchanging and stagnant, but for the youth it was boring. The youth needed something more, and they got it by listening to songs from African Americans experimenting with sounds. Rockabilly is one of the darling sounds of the more rebellious Southern youths, and it found its face in Elvis, who would eventually be known and referred to as its creator. Even Elvis is somewhat cautious about accepting the title of King of Rock and Roll or its subgenres rockabilly. However, creator or not, Elvis's presence ensured the rise of this new unique tune. It had been underground for years without anyone knowing what it was, except the rebels of the time of which Elvis was a part. Elvis would visit clubs that had policies on who could attend to bask in the sweetness of these tunes. Luckily for Elvis and this new rock and roll subgenre, Sun Records was looking for a white man who could fully sing like an African American. African Americans' inflection in their songs was pivotal to what Sun Records boss Sam Phillips was looking for. That tone that only African Americans seem to have was also found in Elvis, who had it in abundance. It's not unusual for Elvis not to have that tone, as African American artists inspired the greatness that was Elvis. When he joined Sun Records, Sam partnered him with Arthur Big Boy Crudup, who wrote "That's All Right" for Elvis to perform, which he did with so much passion and intensity that he was impressed. Arthur had earlier performed the song in 1946. Another record followed after, a cover of Bill Monroe's Blue Moon of Kentucky, which was faster than the original and more agreeable to the youths who could dance to it. That's All Right was a song that confused DJs, irritated them, or even both. It should be so. The song combined many tones that the DJs didn't know where to place the song. It was as if the song itself rebelled against the current genres. Some country radio stations would say it was too black, and R&B stations would say it was too white. This continued until some radio stations took a chance, and two things happened. There was the birth of a new genre and the rise of Elvis. The two events are interwoven, and for some people it is the same as there wouldn't have been a new genre if Elvis hadn't sung it for the world. 1954 heralded the birth of this new tune. There would be tours in the South, and despite the changes in locations, there was one constant. Elvis wowed the audience. However, it isn't all settled yet. Memphis had gotten a taste of this exotic sound, and soon he became a big fish for the Sun Records small pond. 2 years after singing Arthur Crudup's That's All Right Mama, Elvis found himself at the doorstep of RCA Records in Nashville, and a whole different type of challenge emerged. Steve Sholes knew he had a star on his hands, but Nashville folks were so steeped in their conservatism that they rejected and criticized new sounds. Like Sam Phillips, Sholes was willing to try out and experiment with new sounds that would help the music industry to evolve, rigid fans or not. The country music fans in Nashville didn't know what hit them when the rockabilly entered full swing. The new tune gave country music life and prevented it from phasing out of relevance. Soon Elvis began to dominate the billboards, and fans began to hop on the train. Elvis will soon be crowned King of Western Bop, and as Deshawn writes, the King got his 5th Billboard Country Chart #1 in less than a year. So the resistance of the country music lovers became futile as Sholes targeted the younger audience, who had become tired of the same tones and wanted to taste musical freedom. Focusing on the youths was the brightest idea that Sholes had, as it helped with the complete marketability of Elvis. So the audience was filled with rebellious youth who saw Elvis as the leader of their rebellion and would do what he did. This adoration of Elvis was fitting. He had become a sensational superstar after all. His fashion sense had become even more pronounced than it was during his high school years. His clothing began to match the new tune he produced. First he styled his hair into a pompadour and began to wear custom-dyed boots, and his loyal fans completely bought into this look. They began to dress like Elvis and copy his style. The superstar was so invested in his looks that he worked with hired hands who would help him maintain them. The Lansky brothers were incredibly brilliant in how they helped Elvis manage his looks. The brothers' skill at managing his glam would come from the expertise of managing different stars. The brothers prepped Elvis for what would turn out to be a controversial TV appearance in the Milton Berle TV show. After the show, about 500,000 wrote Berle that they wouldn't watch his show again because he permitted the sleek superstar to dance on screen. The dance was one of the most suggestive dances ever. Some hip thrusting was involved. The dance made the maiden's cheek redden with desire. In retrospect, it was a risky move, but what Elvis did, knowing the kind of environment he was in, he wouldn't be the rebellion's leading man if he wasn't daring. Although in his next TV appearance he wasn't given the freedom of artistic expression, so instead of wearing fashionable wide-legged trousers, loafers and loose blazers, Elvis dressed more formally when he appeared on TV with Steve Allen. As a conservative, Steve wasn't going to allow Elvis to act as he wanted. Steve ensured Presley wore a tailcoat with a top hat and gloves. If you didn't know he was going on TV, you would think he was going for a job interview. Steve also didn't allow Elvis to dance as he sang Hound Dog. A muted TV appearance or not, the audience had also accepted the true rebellious nature of Elvis. A forced formal dressing couldn't even change that. In fact, the uniqueness of Elvis's looks changed people's perception of Southern people. Hillbilly was a derogatory word for folks living in the more rural side of the United States. The prevailing perception was that the rural people were drab and unsophisticated. Then Elvis came around with grace and sparkling looks that earned him the nickname the Hillbilly Cat of Music. So with Elvis's influence, people came to associate the word with meaning something positive. However, Elvis's influence didn't stop there. Elvis was an inspiration, and he inspired not only the youth but even fellow musical artists. Elvis inspired Nashville artists to make the switch to this new fast-tempo genre. The people initially resisted these Nashville singers, but with Elvis's eventual success, the path opened up for these other Nashville singers. Elvis also influenced singers like Buddy Holly and Marty Robbins to drop country for the newest exotic sound that filled his discography. The template of these singers on how to perform with the sound came from Presley, so in the end everyone did what Presley had already done. Record labels also felt the frenzy, and with Elvis selling millions of records, they wanted to replicate his success with their artists. One of these artists was Gene Vincent, who sang Bebopaloola, an iconic rockabilly song. In Memphis Sun Records, the label where Elvis had become a sensation, also kept signing artists who could give life to that exotic new music. They had recording deals with Jerry Lee Lewis, Warren Smith, Sonny Burgess, Roy Orbison, Billy Lee Riley, Carl Perkins, and others. Carl Perkins gave the studio Blue Suede Shoes in 1955, and it was such a wholesome song. Many people argue that it was the best song in the genre, and it was so good that Elvis had to make a cover. As expected, Elvis's cover had more success with sales, but the new genre's lovers believed Carl's song was more rockabilly than Elvis's. Jerry Lee Lewis had great commercial success for Sun Records, and within just a year of Sun signing him in 1956, he outsold every other musician that Sun Records had ever signed. Considering the fact that Elvis was one of those musicians that Sun signed, Lewis's feat was extraordinary. The beauty about him was that he could alternate between sounds. His most popular song, Whole Lotta Shaking Going On, usually topped both country and rock charts. Lewis also got personal successes that he got multiple Grammy Awards for country music and also got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. No wonder folks called him the killer of the two genres. The Elvis rockabilly train found another stop in Texas, which housed talents like Ronnie Dawson, Sleepy LaBeef, and Buddy Knox. California, the operational base of musicians like Ricky Nelson, the Collins Kids, and Eddie Cochran, also developed a taste for this rhythmic tune. Female artists also jumped on the bandwagon, and the most prominent among them were Wanda Jackson, Janie Martin, and Brenda Lee. Wanda Jackson may be the most prominent of them all. After all, people referred to her as the Queen of Rockabilly. She has Elvis to thank for this, as he told her when they were both on tour that she could get into the new buzzing genre. She followed that advice and became quite the sensation with her first song in that style, but her albums had problems selling at first. However, she was still luckier than most artists who tried this. Many records of it didn't make the charts. It made it seem as if the ones that made the charts were exceptions and not the norm. Perhaps acceptance wasn't as far wide as people thought. We believe that this isn't the case. Rockabilly was unique, and it seemed to accept only artists with enormous talent. Still, it provided a breath of fresh air, and it continued to evolve until it couldn't any more. By the end of the 50s, the taste for it dwindled, but Elvis did something again. He helped the genre rise up from the ashes like a phoenix to please people's ears again. Sadly, the man responsible for the rise of it again did so in death. Elvis's death triggered mourning that made people seek that genre in 1977 and beyond. Interestingly, the craze started in Europe and rapidly spread to Asia, especially Japan. Fans abroad began to dress in 50s style, and old records began to get more airtime. Europeans began bringing veterans like Charlie Feathers and Johnny Burnett's rock and roll trio abroad for shows and festivals. In fact, these veterans had more relevance during this Elvis-inspired revival than they did when rockabilly was hot. And so, with the genre's re-emergence, new acts began to form. There was the Stray Cats, a New York band that became one of England's exciting acts at the time. Their sound mixed with the English sounds, and when they came to the United States, they had a hard version of rockabilly to wow the audience with. There would always be the question of who created the rockabilly sound, and depending on who you ask, the answers would be different. However, if there's anything everyone agrees on, it is that Elvis is the face of rockabilly and helped make it popular. It became mainstream because he sang it, and it was associated with flair, as Elvis dazzled his audience with his good looks and spectacular clothing. He helped people who were averse to change see that change can be a blessing and could be enjoyable. So, thank you, Elvis. Rock on. Once people couldn't resist Elvis. They almost thought his talent is like a superpower. For the government to take advantage of that, can you imagine? How was Elvis Presley used as a weapon in the war? Watch this video.